All right, welcome back to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight on your brain. And today we are going to start with a follow-up on something we talked about last time, which was Saquon Barkley's ankle injury. And where do you want to start with it, Sam?
Well, let's show it first.
Okay.
So what I'm going to bring up is a little video. So for those that are a little squeamish about injuries, go ahead and turn away. Did that go full screen for you?
Yep, there we go.
All right. So here is the injury in slow-mo. They're walking him off right here. But watch as he rolls in. All right. Nice little eversion of the ankle there. So
yeah, it's not really supposed to go that way.
No, not that fast. Anyways, you can move it that way, but I wish we had a even more slow mo. But yeah. All right. So the good news, if you want to watch it one more time, watch for something in particular. Watch the way he bounces back. So it goes and then springs back like a rubber band. So that is actually maybe a good sign, because that could be. Okay, so here, excuse me, inversion was what we had, where it sprains the lateral ligaments. Now, the fact that it bounced back shows something stayed connected, right? Otherwise, it would have just kept going. So that's good news. Now, the thing is, we need to look at that lateral ankle, and these three that are circled here are the major players. Like, ignore the Achilles tendon for now. I know that's circled as well, but we've got three ligaments that connect all to the fibula, which is the little outside bone on your shin, and then the big one is the tibia, what people call their shin bone. And because the toe was pointed, what we call plantar flexed, we're probably looking at an order of operation here where it's this anterior ligament, then it would be the medial, and then the posterior ligament, in that order, if we were to get a complete tear all the way down the line. Now they're predicting him to come back maybe in a week or two. So I'm assuming we don't even have a complete tear of any of those. But that would be the order if they did tear.
And that's what caught my attention why I wanted to follow up with it. Is when I heard because you were, when I was describing the injury plus the swelling there, that you thought there was a tear and there was going to have to be surgery. And when I heard he didn't have to have surgery, something it made me think of was something you've talked about.
I have to say the hardest words. I was wrong. So I was doing some research on the tear, and I'm going to have to preface this with my style of going through university study was to front load all my good grades and then coast into the end. And we always did foot and ankle last. So although I did cover it in sports medicine, I had to really go back and research this one. So because of the proximity, see how close the bone is to the attachment points, the insertion in the origin on that ligament, because they're that close, rarely do you ever need surgery. They heal on their own, even if it's a complete tear. So I was wrong about that one. So, but the severity of it, still looking at the timeline. Now, the other part of it that plays into it is those are for stability, right? The muscles should be doing the action of the foot, and those are like the guardrail on the road, like we always talk about with the ACL and the MCL as well. They're going to tape the shit out of that ankle. So it's going to probably have, like Barry Sanders used to have, 2 rolls of tape per ankle, where those things aren't even going to move. So all they have to do is stabilize the joint, and he'll be able to play on it with just minimal pain. Now, the swelling, ankles are always a bitch, because if you injure your ankle on the field, the first thing they're trying to do is get it elevated, get it compressed, get it iced on, because they swell up like crazy and you can't diagnose the injury on the field. And they swell up within seconds. And that's just gravity. It's hard for the fluid to come back up the leg. So ankle injuries, typically we get the diagnosis later because of the swelling. A big swollen ankle isn't a damning thing when you see an ankle injury, just because any injury to the ankle does that.
Well, what it made me think of was a couple of things. Uh, First off, one of the many things we make fun of Collinsworth about is his man crush on Saquon Barkley's legs, uh, and how massive and powerful they are. And you've had experience with this where someone has had a really scary injury that they were able to bounce back from because you had created strength
Hmm.
around that joint. And that's where my thought process was, and what I wanted to talk about is uh one of the reasons he's probably going to be able to bounce back so quick. And you saw him when he injured it, he
Hmm.
bounced back real quick, but there was a lot of pain and a lot of swelling, as he's incredibly strong and works incredibly hard uh, on his leg strength, not just his strength, but his mobility. If you watch some of
Hmm.
his workout videos, he does a lot of lateral movement. He does a lot of him and Derrick Henry too. Derrick Henry's workout videos are ridiculous
Hmm.
of his balance and stability training, so that he can stay on his feet and he can change directions real fast.
Yeah, and you also see him running, and Derrick Henry too. And I'll go back to Barry Sanders. They almost run slightly bow-legged because they have such power laterally, which takes away a little bit of your top speed. So if you're training an Olympic sprinter, 100-meter dash where they never have to turn, you're going to see a lot tighter gait pattern for efficiency. But these guys that are slightly bow-legged for that lateral movement is actually protective of the ACL as well. So we brought up RG3 last time, where you see that knee collapse in. Well, that slight bow-leggedness is actually protective of that. And if I'm training a field athlete or a court athlete, I'd rather see a little bit of that than that knee collapsing in, just for their protection. And you notice they're also the best. The fastest sprinters aren't the best running backs. It's the ones that could stop on a dime, turn, spin, juke laterally. They're the ones that do a one cut. And they typically a lot of times don't get those 95-yard touchdowns because they get caught from behind by that fast cornerback or safety that's chasing them down. So, but
Or unless you're Jim Browning, you just run people over because you're a freight train.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Now the worry with Barkley's injury is, uh, how do they go about stabilizing it from here on out? Because depending on what the damage to the ligament is, yeah, it will heal, but is it going to heal stretched out? Is it going to heal tight? How long is it actually going to take for that ligament to heal? Because they can tape it up and stabilize it, but how long is it going to take for that ligament to heal? Or is it something we need to protect for the rest of his life because he's already damaged it and it's going to be weakened with scar tissue, et cetera?
mm,
So the going forward is going to be where we see things get interesting, because I really think, because you see his very minimal tape on his legs right there, and he stepped on somebody's foot, freak accident. You can't really account for
yeah.
that a whole lot, especially since he was pronated on his foot because he landed with his heel and his foot came down, his toes came down, and that's a very weak position even if you have a strong ankle, and so that caused that inversion to happen rapidly. Now, the interesting thing is when you see the stability, it's a mobile joint. We talked about this last time, right? So you mobilize it. We need it to be mobile to have proper movement, but at the same time, we don't want it to get hurt because it's in a vulnerable position, and because it's mobile, it doesn't have a lot of stops to keep you from going out of that position. So they're going to tape it up. Now, what happens when you stabilize a mobile joint? Like, not stabilize it in the good exercise way, stabilize it in a locking way, like a bracing way.
Yep. Yep.
We got a joint right above it, which is the knee. And when you stabilize a mobile joint, the stable joint above it has a tendency to want to go mobile. And so he's going to need that bow-legged type run, and he's going to need to really pay attention to how he works his hips to keep that knee from collapsing in when he makes a cut. Or if he plants his foot and some part of nature of someone hitting him, uh, a slip on the ground or whatever, that the ankle's not going to be able to adjust. So you're going to see micro adjustments within the knee that could have wear and tear over time.
Yeah, you've put me off on a tangent here because I have a personal theory and pet peeve, because I have a lot of friends and family that are active or former military, and I've worked with a lot of a lot of military people who, especially when they get out after a long time of service, have a lot of knee and hip problems. And my pet theory is that it's because of the boots.
It's
That
a major player. Yeah.
that even uh, even if you're not a combat arms person, you're spending all day every day with your ankle locked in, and a lot of your physical activity, when you're on marches or maneuvers or whatever, your ankle is locked in
Mhm.
constantly. You never get that work of the ankle, and for good reason, because a boot is designed to lock your ankle in because you're moving over rough surfaces where the ankle could be easily compromised. You want to lock it in and make it more stable, but that's going to translate up the chain like we've talked about and give um, knee and then hip problems if it continues to translate up the chain. And so I've recommended and nagged at people like my dad in particular of do get somewhere where you can work barefooted, either in a pool, or just doing basic kind of calisthenics or water aerobics or whatever in a pool, or preferably in a sand pit. If you do some basic calisthenic type things barefooted in a sand pit, it's going to force that foot to flex. It's going to force that ankle to move, but in a way where you should, be able to be somewhat protective of
Mhm.
it and let it work the way it's supposed to work and let it get stronger.
Yeah, we do. When you get these athletes that do tape up all season during practice and the games, a lot of times it's a good practice to the first part of at least the first part of the off season to have them train barefoot. And you got to do it case by case basis because
Mhm.
I wouldn't want someone training too hard in an unstable situation when they have stability issues. So you might warm them up barefoot and then have them put their shoes on for the lift or something along that variety. So it
Well, it's,
also,
it's
if
like
it's not
the
a problem, some people come out of the season and they don't get an issue with
yeah
it just because their genetics or their training age or whatever. Because if you got a really stable joint going into the season, chances are you're not going to lose it just because you tape up during the games and practice, because you're still walking on it normally the rest of the time,
Mm.
or doing your sprints or your weight room stuff without all the tape. So it's really a case by case basis, and if a lot of times you see someone who had a stability issue to begin with, uh, are the ones you really have to work on the most. But yeah, anytime they tape up those ankles like that, I get worried about, are you going to have a knee injury coming out of this? Because something's going to give. If you move perfectly, you'll be fine because that
Yeah.
ankle should be locked in a stable position naturally when you cut on the ground. But I do always worry, is it gonna translate up the chain? But with your military example, don't also discredit the rucks that they wear for the knee and back pain.
Mhm, mhm.
When I was working with airstrike operations, they would typically come lift with us and we'd do our combatives and everything. And then they'd go off to the hill country and do a 20-mile ruck. Uh, and these guys had the stiffest hips that I've ever worked with, because
Yeah.
you get into a pattern, you want to be efficient. If you're doing a jog march for 20 miles with a 70-pound ruck, you don't want a big giant leg action because it's inefficient. You want to
Yeah.
get in a pattern and as long as you can last. So they'd come back, we'd spend 20 minutes just kind of trying to get them into a natural position so they could do a squat. Uh, or a lunge motion. So they really had super tight hips, and part of it was the lower part of the chain with the boots coming up, and the other part was just efficiency of movement while they had a ruck on their back.
Yeah. And I talked to you about the kid I'm working with now, who is a competitive swimmer. Uh, I've I've never seen hips so tight, and like I say, most of my work has been with desk jockeys who get tight hips just from sitting too much. This guy's in incredibly great shape.
Mhm.
He's a state level swimmer, um, but because that's all he ever did. You talk about getting in those patterns, just that this is all his leg ever did, is just this tight little movement in
Mhm.
this one little pattern. and it's I was kind of mean yet to him yesterday because I made him do something mean I get from you, which was a lateral into a crossover, and boy howdy, that took him a while to just even figure out how to do the movement, because it was something so alien to his hips. And that was kind of my point with going back to this Saquon Barkley injury, is if you let yourself get into a narrow physical pattern, it's going to create issues for you.
Mhm.
And not just if we're talking about athletes here, of if you get such tunnel vision about training directly for whatever you're competing with, it's going to create other problems, it's going to create vulnerabilities. But even if you're just a regular schmo, okay, well, I was up on a step ladder, doing some pruning and trimming in my garden the other day. It was a little bit shaky. If I, fell back or stepped off wrong, you know, there's some vulnerability. There's a potential to roll my ankle or twist my knee. Okay. But if you have good, strong structure around that joint, and that joint is used to moving in different ways, in different planes of movement, you're going to uh, you're going to have a better chance to resist an injury, or if you do injure yourself, you're going to bounce back better.
Yeah, I think that actually kind of segues into the thing I sent you. The video of the guys talking about pitching and stretching the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so first rule of thumb, everybody in the audience, all five of you, if someone gives you a statement like never ever stretch the shoulder, there's a key word in there that you should go ahead and move on. Never. Never say never, right? Never say always. But the title of the video was never stretch your shoulder. And if you go through that whole video and you change never with sometimes or may, or use words like people overdo this, it would have been perfectly fine all the way front to back. It would have been a perfectly fine video. And I didn't know about copyright laws and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to show the video because it's on their website. It's not a YouTube video that we can pull up publicly, but this is on, I'm sure I could say the name, nationalpitching.com, and it's Tom House Sports. Again, there was a lot of decent stuff in there, but when you're talking in absolutes, you ruin the whole thing. And I can immediately, the person who brought this video to me, I can immediately give you a few examples of when it's a good idea to stretch a shoulder or a mobile joint, right? One of the statements they made was never ever stretch a mobile joint. Well, that's not true. Because if your mobile joint is immobile, then you're going to sacrifice something up and down the chain. And I'm going to bring a good example from baseball here. This guy is extremely externally rotated. This is a pretty damn normal for what you see happening in the arm, and it's just a really good shot of it. His shoulders are he's a little bit, even though he should be in full abduction, he's a little bit horizontally adducted, and he's extremely externally rotated. Now, if that shoulder isn't extremely externally rotated with a little bit of T-spine extension along the way, that stable joint, which is the elbow, is going to be what bends backwards, because that ball's getting back here no matter what.
Yep.
Just with the force of the body. So what happens? You get a UCL stretch. And everybody knows that over time, that's where you get Tommy Johns. Eventually, it either pops or it just becomes so stretched out it's not working. And you get a tendonitis that degrades into a tendinosis. So if that shoulder is not mobile enough to go into that external rotation in conjunction with the T-spine, obviously, then that elbow is going to suffer. So if I've got an athlete that is like me and has a little bit of tightness in the shoulder, and that's as far as I can externally rotate, well, guess what's handling the rest of the load? That elbow, right? So that's a situation where, guess what? That person probably, he's obviously an elite level pitcher, so he's probably does it already. But they need to do some sort of mobilization of that mobile joint. And if it is locking, they need to figure out what the issue is. Is it in the mobile joint? Is it stability with the scapula? Is it the T-spine not being able to move, or whatever it is along that chain? So never ever stretch a mobile joint. Well, if his mobile joint is immobile, he's screwed. Probably didn't get to this level, right? Another example that I can just show you visibly, and this is something you should work with all the time if you're in fitness training, is if this mobile joint can't hinge, what are you going to see? That's how they're going to bend down to pick something up. If they can't hinge this mobile joint, if they're too tight to do that, whether it's hamstring tightness or locked up tensor fascia, anything along that chain, then your back is going to suffer from that. And if we look at the complexity of the hip, as we did last week, if this is tight, if these are tight, now this is all around the hip complex, which should be mobile. Then either that low back is going to compensate, which should be stable, even though it's made of lots of little segments, or the knee is going to compensate. And usually with the hip tightness, you see it in the low back. Hip weakness, you see it in the knee. So yeah, again, just two easy examples of why sometimes you need to mobilize a mobile joint, because it should be mobile. And because we live in the 21st century here, where we can sit in chairs all day and lay in bed and watch Netflix at night, sometimes we need to do that, or sit in bad posture at school all day, like these young baseball pitchers. We have to. And I mean, thoughts on that? Because I'm just going to keep repeating myself, ranting, because I hate those statements. Never, ever, or always do, because yes, sometimes it's the proper prescription. Yes, some people overdo it. You know, some coaches get a baseball player and say, "Oh, we're going to mobilize your shoulder and hips," whether the athlete needs it or not. Sometimes they need to stabilize it because they're springy, and they're bottoming out on their movements. But yeah, just be wary of statements like that, videos like that, especially since in the middle they're selling their program as well.
Yeah, several thoughts actually. Well, you just mentioned about the whether or not they need it.
Don't tell my doctor, but I need to mobilize a joint.
With pitching in particular, it's really easy to see the differences in styles when you just look at, take a couple of the biggest and best of all time, compare and contrast Randy Johnson and Roger Clemens. Okay, Randy Johnson, long, lean, as you say, springy, very elastic in his motions, and then Roger Clemens, kind of shorter, stockier, stouter dude. Okay, they both pitched incredibly fast. They just did it through slightly different mechanisms. Clemens had more just raw power. Randy Johnson had more elasticity and spring, is where his speed came from. So one's going to need to work on a little bit of strength. One's going to need to work on a little bit more on mobility. So think about, a couple months back when I wanted to come up with gym rules and thinking about it and talking about it out loud with you, how general did we get when we got to the always and never? We were incredibly general in our statements about, it's not, never do this thing. It's never do something if you can't do it through a proper range of motion, through proper biomechanics. It's not, never do a squat because it hurts my low back. It's no, don't do a squat if you're doing what you just showed. If you're doing it by rounding your back, I don't deadlift because it hurts my back. No, don't deadlift if you do it like that. Don't deadlift if you can't hinge your hip and you're rounding your back. Okay, that's how general we get. Now sometimes I do use always and never when I'm talking to kids. Okay, because you haven't formed the necessary cognitive ability to really take on these nuances. So I don't remember who I heard say this, is you have to learn the rules before you can break the rules.
Mhm.
So you have to know the rules and know why they exist before you can know when to take exceptions to the rules.
Oh, damn
So
it. For some reason, it won't let me share a PDF screen.
well, while you're figuring that, I'll keep ranting. So I think I've mentioned this before, is I've told kids never throw a weighted baseball. Okay. Knowing that I
There's a
can
time and place for it.
I can very quickly grab you a dozen studies that show that it will increase your velocity 3 to 5 miles an hour. Okay. But it can pull your form if you're not doing it right, if you're not cognizant, if you don't have someone watching you that's good and competent and knows what a proper pitch is supposed to look like. It's going to pull your arm out of its proper path, and you're going to risk injury.
Well, yeah, not only that, the injury risk, but here's a golden rule for athletic training, and this goes for throwing a ball, sprinting. So if you tie in a sled to somebody or a parachute or doing resisted type runs, anything that has a mechanical and a speed component to it, so you can measure velocity. If you slow them down by more than 10% with your resistance, whether it's a weighted ball or a sled or whatever, if you slow them down by more than 10%, you're going to change the mechanics. That's why you also never have your sprinters run in sand. Sure, it's hard, but it's going to change their mechanics. So you can push them with the intensity with non-sport specific movements, like doing a power clean to increase their vertical jump or to increase their sprint speed. But if they're doing the actual act, if it slows them down by 10% or more, you will change their mechanics. So if throwing that weighted ball takes, say they can throw 100 miles an hour to make the math easy, if it pulls it down to a max of 90, then it's changing the mechanics. Continue.
Well, okay, so the other thought I had is Tom House is a big name in pitching. He was the Rangers pitching coach for a long time. Tom House is where I learned how to throw. My uncle had gotten some of his videos on throwing and pitching, and his steps, his mechanics, his method is where I learned to throw. And he's really good at that. He's really good at teaching, especially his basic 101 stuff. His method is really good at teaching kids how to throw a baseball, which is kind of complicated. To throw it properly. So if you've ever had kids or watched kids, or if you were a kid who, if you can remember back that far, trying to play baseball, starting out in t-ball, man, those throws are terrible.
Which tells you actually something. It's a little dirty secret in sports. It's not a natural movement.
It is not.
If it was, I mean, to get the most out of your body from it, it's actually not natural, which means it's going to over time do damage to your body. If it was a natural motion, then you should be able to take a kid and he'd throw the ball with no coaching. And the younger the kid, the more properly they're going to do it because they have no bad motor patterns. But it's not natural. So you have to take them out of their normal pattern. Which again tells you that at some point you need breaks from it. You need to account for it with strength and conditioning and everything. But you were talking about Tom House being a good pitching coach, which I don't know enough about pitching coaches to know that, other than I trust a few in the area because they stay in their lane. And this is a situation where they're commenting on the strength and conditioning and the anatomy around pitching versus the actual technique of the unnatural movement. So it is someone with my job to keep the athlete healthy while they're doing that unnatural movement. So I need to know how badly that affects their body and where I do need to mobilize and where I do need to stabilize and then apply it to the specific client. Or if I have a group of clients, I do groupings where I'm saying, okay, y'all are springy, y'all are what we call stiff strength athletes. So you're successful because you're so stiff and you're like a wound up spring that just explodes out because you're also strong. and you're successful because you've got this nice long fluid movement that springs out into the throw. So you initially separate them and then try to have them meet in the middle with their training. But you have to take two separate approaches. Now, inevitably, if I have a pair that wants to train together, I get one of each. It always seems to work out that way for some reason. But that's just my own personal anecdote with that. But again, he's not staying in his lane. And I don't know who the other four guys are in that video, if any of them do my job or whatever. But again, they're making the same statements. And it didn't surprise me that Michael Boyle's name came up in there somewhere, because he is known for making an extreme statement and having to retract later, saying always do this or never do that, and then having to say, well, I was wrong. And
which is great for a clickbait video. One trick that will there are no magic pills, and there are very few absolutes outside of mathematics.
Yeah, 90% of training, Michael Boyle's one of the best in the world. But those 10% where he keeps making these extreme statements, it annoys the hell out of me. Maybe because I expect more because he is so good, But he's also known. He'll take something back, and they applaud him for it. I'm like, well, maybe he wouldn't need to take as many things back if he would quit making so many extreme statements.
And that leads me to my final thought, which was, compared to Tom House is, and I assume a lot of the guys around him are pitching guys. They're baseball guys. And a lot of them are kind of old fashioned. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm old and grumpy myself.
Mm-hmm.
But that means they're in a lane, and they need to recognize that. Compare that to one of our go-to sources, Eric Cressy, who got into baseball training on accident, kind of like you did.
Yeah, he was a powerlifting guy.
Yeah, he was a powerlifting guy. And now Scherzer's one of his clients, I think. Is that one of his big names? He's got some big names. So, yeah, he's got some big name guys. I feel like he used to train Pettis.
Well, he's technically with the Yankees.
Oh yeah. So he's trained some really, some of the biggest name pitchers in the last few years, and he's their strength and conditioning coach. And I think that the reason he's so good, the reason you're so good with pitchers, is because you didn't play baseball. I mean, what you played a little t-ball when you were little, but it wasn't one of your sports.
T-ball. No, I had an old bat we found, and I would hit a ball every once in a while, but
just because.
Okay, somehow I lost my screen. Hold on.
All right. Well, I can still see you.
There we go.
So because they're coming at it from a completely different area, they're able to look at it not for the pitching part of it, but just look at the biomechanics, as you said, of, okay, well, if this is how you have to pitch, what do I have to do to make sure that is as safe and effective a movement as I can make it, considering that it is such an unnatural movement. And I think that helps a lot, and it is illustrative of how we individually have to think sometimes when you hear people talking about, stepping back or stepping outside of yourself and trying to look at a problem or an issue from the outside. It's really freaking hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can do it, it's incredibly helpful. It will give you a different perspective. It will let you know, buying something, do I really need to buy this thing? Is this the proper use of my money? When you're in the moment, it's easy to rationalize and talk yourself into something. But if you can step back and try and think, okay, if I was my friend looking at it from the outside, what would it look like?
Okay, this is what I wanted to bring up the PDF from. So I just took a screenshot so I could share it here. I have to figure out how to show PDFs on here, but this is from the Vertical Jump Bible, which every young strength conditioning coach should read. It's essential, and part of it is apply this to all athletes, but they say jumpers here because it's the Vertical Jump Bible. But you break them up first into two groups, which is the strength jumper and it's on the next page, but she calls it the elastic what I called springy. She calls it the elastic jumper. So it's it's not it's not a long read. It's one every young coach should read, just to get an idea of how to group athletes, if nothing else. It goes into the nuances of vertical jump training, but also two major points from that book is being able to separate your athletes and to better diagnose what they need to work on. And the other is the idea of vertical jump training isn't just putting on somebody on a Vertimax and having them jump a million times. And actually, you got to really minimize the sets and reps into quality sets and reps versus just a lot of jumping. Because I see these volleyball teams and basketball teams, we got a vertical jump trainer, and he or she just has them jump over and over and over again. And I see RG3 knees going all over the place. And no, it's about minimizing those things. I'm taking a kid and dropping them off a box till they can control their knees on the landing. So two major points from that book. I won't go because it takes us on a tangent, but is the idea of being able to separate your athletes and to the point of what we're talking about. Sometimes you need to mobilize them. And then the other part is dose response to your training, and quality training versus high difficulty training from a feel standpoint, RPE standpoint. So yeah, those are the kind of the directions I wanted to go there with that, because I think it really came. Saquan made me think of it, and then I got this video from a dad of a kid I work with, and it's the mobile stable joint issue is something that should be accounted for even in fitness. So.
Well, it's a good place to wrap it up, because I do think it does all tie together of so, here on the one extreme of where we ended of if you get that, you said stay in your lane, which is important. Know what you know and know what you don't know, but it's a lane. It shouldn't be a tunnel, right? So that's where that lane becomes dangerous, is if it becomes a tunnel, and that's all you can see, because you look on the other side of Barkley, who has, he doesn't have those RG3 knees. He's got a very good, stable and strong structure, through the whole kinetic chain. And he's going to be able to bounce back pretty quick here.
Yeah, and it really sucks, because as I watched that injury, I'm like, this was a freak accident. He was doing the right things. He just stepped on somebody's foot while he was looking in another direction. So maybe the only takeaway you can get from that is have a little bit more situational awareness, but other than that.
Well, like I said, I think what you take away from that, especially if you're a normal person, is you can never plan for the freak accidents, because they're freak accidents. So if you have a good foundation, then you're going to be able to deal with the unexpected better. So don't get that tunnel vision.
Yeah, we call it robustness. If you have a robust system, this carries over to all the topics we talk about, whether it's economics or a political system or the human body. If you have a robust system, you're able to survive an unfortunate incident. And so what we learned from something like COVID is our system wasn't as robust as we thought it was, because we had a lot of division in just the population. So that's one thing. We had some glaring weak points in our healthcare system. We had some glaring weak points in our information system, which would be accounted for from biases on down the chain. In our research system, how we assimilate research and get it out to the public so that everybody's well informed. We have all these glaring weaknesses, and they were exposed, thrown on our head. Where in Barkley, he was in a freak accident, but because he has very little weakness in his lower body structure, I would assume his upper body too, because he takes hits all day. He's going to be able to come back and do his job. I obviously had an unfortunate event, but I've only taken one day off work, and that was the day of the surgery. And the rest of the time I've been doing everything with one hand. Everybody says, oh, well, you're training is why it happened. And I said, well, my training is why I can keep doing my job, because I can take a 45-pound plate and put it on a bar up here with one hand is the reason I can keep doing my job. So a robust system handles unfortunate events. And we see that with Barkley, but we saw the opposite of it with what happened in 2020 and now going into 2021 and probably into 2022. And we had that meme right in the beginning where it's got the girls. It needs to be the cover for our next COVID one, where it says, traveler from the future. Oh, what is this? 2020. Oh, the first year of the pandemic. The what?
Mm-hmm.
The first year.
Mm-hmm. Well, do we want to use that to segue into going back to trying to get ourselves banned?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Why not?
All right, let's take a short break so I can get some more coffee.
Okay, cool. All right, we're back, and I think with our COVID talk today, I wanted to go in the direction of what's kind of the news of the day about it, which is the Joe Rogan interview of Dr. Sanjay Gupta. And as usual, depending on which media outlets you watch, you get one side of the story or the other. Rogan killed Gupta, or Gupta schooled Rogan on research, or something along those lines from both sides. And you see the retractions that, of course, this is where I had to change a little bit of my opinion over the last couple of days, is the retractions that Gupta's doing on CNN, basically trying to take back what he said in a lot of ways. But so go ahead.
He's a coward. Don't trust cowards, and bullies tend to be cowards, because when he's face to face talking to Rogan, he was a completely different person than when he went back on CNN and basically said, no, he's still an idiot.
I do suggest taking 3 hours out of your time, because it is an investment, to watch the whole thing. Because if you just listen to the right wing media side of it, you're getting about 10% of the conversation, which is where Rogan held him to the fire about the lie about the horse dewormer. And he was kind of aggressively holding him to the fire, and as he should. It was slander about him. And the other big part of the conversation was the debate on myocarditis incident versus actual children being admitted to the hospital. And this is where I kind of wanted to touch. And this is where I think Rogan kind of dropped the ball, but I give him a pass because he's an entertainer, not a researcher. He's a really smart guy, but he is not a researcher. And there's something that just kind of like was a flashing light for me, but he kept glossing over it in their little debate. Because the problem with this part of the interview was that Rogan brought up research, and Jamie brought it up on their little thing, that was there's more cases of myocarditis than there is of all hospitalization for COVID from I think it was 14 and under, or some age group along those lines, children, because they were talking about the vaccines for 5 to and above. And Gupta brought up the research that if you compare COVID infected children to vaccine children, that it was like 8 or 12 times more incidence of myocarditis in the COVID than there was in the vaccinated. The problem with this debate was they're both right. They both were presenting real data. So what you have to do as a scientist in this point is, okay, so we got this in this experiment and this in this experiment. What's the difference, or where does it meet in the middle in the real world? And that's where it never went. So they just went back and forth with their data. What do you say to this? Well, what do you say to this? Well, what do you say to this? Well, what do you say to this? And they were both right. And this is the problem with the argument, because the red side wants Rogan's data to be right, which it is, and the blue side wants Gupta's data to be right, which it was. But what's the difference between the two? There's a variable missing, and well, variable, I should say. But in Gupta's study, there's a constant, where in Rogan's study, there's a variable. and that's infection. If you're vaccinated, you are 100% infected with the vaccine, right? If you have COVID already, you are 100% infected. So their number of participants has a 100% infection rate on either side. Whereas in Rogan's, there's a 100% infection rate with vaccine, and there is a unknown infection rate with all children in the United States of America. And so there's so many variables that go along with that needs to be the discussion.
Yeah.
And okay, so how do these two marry? So yeah, if your kid gets COVID, he's going to be more likely to have an adverse effect than if he gets a shot. But how likely is your kid with exposure going to get COVID? That's the variable that's missing. What exposure rate do we have versus infection rate with the children?
Well, and you've talked about that a number of times when you bring up the numbers of the way you can. It drives me crazy when I hear this, 10 times more likely, 7 times. Shut up. Okay. What are the, you're skipping a step.
Mm-hmm.
What's the number before that? Okay. So, if you're unvaccinated, you're a gazillion times more likely to die. Okay. Well, what was my number in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That matters. Okay.
Or a single dose on top of infection increases it gives you 2 times more protection versus just being infected. Well, that 2 times is somewhere in between 99.1 and 100. It's not a giant number.
Yeah. I wasn't exactly sure. I was having trouble organizing my thoughts for, part D of our drug, which shall not be named talk. I've got like 20 tabs open right now of stuff that I've been looking at. And of course, it doesn't matter because Joe Rogan had a podcast, and that's the world we live in. But I think this
it does matter because we can bring some of that, we can bridge that gap because he brought up a lot of the points we want to talk about, but he didn't have the expertise to hammer the nuances at that point.
And I also think there may have been some, personal feelings in there because he was being slandered. He absolutely was, and he was ticked off about it, and rightly so. And I haven't been able to watch the whole thing yet, but the first thing that jumped out at me, and I went, wait, what? Was at the very beginning when they're just, hey, how you doing? Welcome to the show. So Rogan says, thank you for reaching out. And I thought, did someone at CNN tell Gupta to reach out and go on Rogan because they were afraid they were going to get sued? I really believe that that's what happened.
Well, with the aftermath of this, they're probably going to get sued anyways.
Because they're going right back to it.
They're going right back to it. Yeah.
But the other thing that it illustrates is, when you were introducing, the topic here basically is it illustrates why cable news is dying, and something that was supposed to be dead, long form interview, is thriving. So you look at, really all of the podcast and YouTube and internet shows, they're not constrained by your typical broadcast format, which is just sound bites and talking heads yelling at each other. The long form interview on TV is basically dead. Even something like 60 Minutes, which is an interview show, they end up, clipping and narrating and getting some back and forth. So they clip it in a way so that it mimics that cable news debate show. But people want substance. They really do. And so something like Rogan, which is 3 freaking hours, and yet he'll have millions of views compared to, the CNN and Fox News shows, which, might have a few 100,000 views. They're a small fraction of what guys like Rogan, or even, Dave Rubin, who's not nearly as big, but even his stuff routinely gets more views than the big cable news shows.
Well, there's good and bad to and we'll stick with Rogan because, okay, so here's the good about the interview. he first of all, he started it off phenomenally by complimenting Gupta on his uh, his ability to do what we talked about earlier with Boyle, to go back and say I was wrong with his marijuana research and his commentary on cannabis. And so he actually kind of led into it with making his guests feel really good about what he did in a way that opens the door and kind of puts a golden bridge of, well, all these other things you're spouting right now about health, maybe you should take some of those things back, just like you did in this other case where you bravely did it on air. And so he led into it with that. He did hold him to the fire on the slander, which was good because he needed to. He needed to get that off his chest to the person that actually mattered. And then he stood his ground on that research debate where it was back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and actually brought up a lot of good points, even though he wasn't an expert in that field. But the bad is he wasn't. What this show, this 3-hour interview was missing was someone who understands that domain, that lane, to be able to say, well, you're saying this and you're saying this. This is where it all comes together, like I'm talking about right here. Or even the counter voice, someone like Pierre Corey or Dr. Malone or one of these other voices that's considered extreme on the other side, to be there and debate back and forth with someone like Rogan, who's smart enough to keep up with the conversation, but not specialized to be the intermediary between the two. And that's what these conversations are lacking. So it's one guest and Rogan, and then another guest and Rogan, and he's not able to push back on Corey on the times when he goes off the rails with ivermectin and like it's the miracle drug of all things. So that's what's lacking, is the marriage of the two where you have them both on.
And well, but what's infuriating to me is that, and where I already didn't have a ton of respect, but I have negative respect now for Gupta, is that he should have been that guy, because he is the expert. I mean, CNN's one of the biggest news networks in the world, and he's their medical expert. He should know, he does know how this stuff works. He does know how to do and read research. And he should have been the one to say that it's not a back and forth. It's not this study versus that study. It should be, how do these go together? Which is where, as we talked about in the segue of the robustness of our system, that because we have become so binary, we have become incredibly brittle and weak. And it shouldn't be that way. And this is very dangerous. How many hundreds of thousands of people have died from COVID unnecessarily because it has become a this versus that? Because when you're talking about health, it is, I mean, it's what we were talking about with pitching is, okay, well, this is an incredibly unnatural motion, but you're good at it or you want to do it. Okay, so how do we do it? Here are the trade-offs, you know, are you more elastic? Are you more powerful? What's your what's your shoulder mobility like? All of these things. These are the trade-offs.
We do it with normal things too. What's also unnatural, sitting in a chair all day. But if you're an accountant, that's what you do. So someone in my field should be able to help you do that all day without hurting all the time.
So, back to the specific example of the studies that Rogan and Gupta were arguing about, is it shouldn't be an argument. It should be a, and this is what it needs to be for parents going into, they need to be able to have a doctor that they can trust and have a conversation with to lay out, okay, well, here are the pros and cons. Here are the pluses and minuses. Here's the likelihood that your child will get COVID in the first place. If they do, this is the likelihood of a serious response. If they get the vaccine, one of the vaccines, we keep saying the vaccine, one of the vaccines, here are the chances that they have a negative response to that, versus if they get COVID, the chances of some kind of negative So you've got all of these variables, you've got all of these factors. They all go together in making a decision, especially on the individual level. And so it needs to stop being a this versus that, and it needs to be a this is the data. It's not the science, it's the data.
Which leads me to another problem I had with the whole interview. And again, it's not with Rogan or with Gupta. It's with the nature of this discussion. Is Rogan brought up that study or the studies that supported his point, and Gupta said, "I'm not aware of that study." You're the number one medical analyst for COVID-19 on a major news network, and you're not aware of every study that's come out on it. You can get on the database and just Google, or not Google, Google Scholar or PubMed, COVID-19, and you can read them all. You got all day. All right. This is what you do. This is your job.
Well, that is especially if he did go on there to keep CNN from getting sued.
Mm-hmm.
You're on there talking about, horse paste and dewormer, but you're not aware of the studies. How are you going to sit there and say authoritatively all these alternative treatments are all, hoke and garbage and there's nothing supporting them, but all of this is great if you're not aware of the studies?
Well, yeah. Well, and this one was specifically on the children and myocarditis, and you're on a national network giving advice to parents that are watching you, and you are not aware of every study on what you're giving advice for, or at least the major ones, or even we'll even narrow it down a little bit more. The studies that your competition networks are talking about.
Yeah.
At least those. At least the ones that are showing up on Newsmax or Fox News or the Blaze or whatever else, or even you're going on Rogan, even the ones Rogan's talked about already.
Yeah.
You've got a crew of people to dig through these and say, this one might be problematic. You better read it and be ready for it.
Yeah. CNN has huge research departments.
Yeah. It's not just Gupta. It's his whole team. There's probably 40 or 50 people that are there just to do that thing.
Well, that segues into something.
Well, no, I got a point off of that though.
Okay.
Because I need to share this screen. This is something problematic. I'm not aware of those studies, but look what happened right after. The studies aren't available anymore. These were peer-reviewed studies. These were not preprints. They're just removed until further notice. And we see a similar name there that we've talked about before.
Wait, how old was this study?
October.
Okay, this was
published. When was it originally published? Well, it's kind of hard to see without the actual citation and study. Yeah. So, but it was recent. Yeah. But yeah, again, peer-reviewed, not preprint. Went through the whole process, and CNN had a problem with it, so they removed it.
The science.
Follow the science. So there's where I kind of wanted to go with that. So your medical expert isn't aware of something, and the thing he wasn't aware of, they just kind of are trying to make disappear. Now, where were you going to go on the tangent?
Well, where I was going to go was, okay, you're not aware of the study, and I haven't dug through all of these because that wasn't really the point. The point was how easy it was for me, someone who I know how to read research, I know how to do research, I know how to read research, but this kind of stuff is witchcraft. So I don't understand the mechanics and the specifics. But how easy was it for me to find a few studies? Well, first off, I stopped using Google and started using DuckDuckGo.
Yeah,
so
that's big.
That is big. It is worth a little bit of a tangent because I've heard some other people say this, and I've been thinking it for a bit. Is Google is no longer a search engine. Even on YouTube, it gets annoying and difficult to find something.
Well, we did this. Remember, I was telling somebody about our podcast, and they looked for it by name, and it didn't come up. They looked for it by name and by name of the episode. I gave them all the keywords we use, and it didn't come up.
Yep. It is no longer a search engine because it's telling you what they want you to see. It's not returning, it's not an algorithm like it used to be returning. I mean, that's how it got big, is because it was the best search engine. If you were looking for something, you were going to find the best results on Google. Well, you no longer get that. You get what they want you to see.
Mhm.
So
Well, don't tell YouTube, but I jacked my algorithm again. I just took a phone, plugged it in so it wouldn't turn off, and ran Vox YouTube videos for 24 hours. So they think I love it, and it helped keep me from getting into that echo chamber. So
nice. So I just went the looking, and here's a study. It's not from the usual suspects of problematic people, and this is from 2020, and here it is, looking at ivermectin inhibit. Now, I was looking for something specific because I had heard people talk about this, and I hadn't seen studies. So I'll show you. There's a theme to these that I'm showing, that inhibits the replication of SARS-CoV-2 in vitro. Okay, and that's something that's important here, because all of these people who are saying ivermectin is unproven, and okay, well, yes, because you can't have the clinical trials that they say you have to accept ivermectin. You can do this stuff in vitro, because that's easier to do. It's a lot harder, especially in the middle of a freaking pandemic, when people need treatment now, or they're going to be potentially die. You can't do the double-blind placebo studies that you would normally do, and then publish in a peer-reviewed journal, because that takes a long time if you're doing it right. Here's one completely different, and where's the original publication? Because this is published online in May of 2021, but this is completely different. This is ivermectin inhibiting hepatitis E. Okay, because this is something I had heard people talk about, is that ivermectin has been shown to inhibit virus replication. This is why it's used off-label, and this isn't new that it has been used off-label, because yes, it's an antiparasitic, but it has been shown to inhibit virus replication. So it can be used as an antiviral, even though that's not what it was developed for, and that's not what its primary use has been. Here's another one from, this is the older one. This was from way back in 2012, that it is a potent inhibitor of whatever the heck that is. Witchcraft. I'm sure that means something to you. An Australian variant of the West Nile virus. Okay, that I understood.
Yeah.
But all that other stuff.
It's just the technical term for it. So yeah, you got that.
So this is West Nile virus. This is all something that we agree exists. This is all something that we agree is a problem.
Let me get my screen back, and I'll.
Okay. Last one.
Okay.
Wait. This is.
Because I didn't have this queued up, but I brought it up just for.
And this is another older one from 2012, and this is using ivermectin to inhibit replication of HIV-1 and dengue fever.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that goes into what I had. Let me bring up one more thing. Okay. So this actually was unscripted, everybody.
F it. We'll do it live.
We're doing it live. There we go. Okay. So we brought this one up last time. Oh, I need to actually share my screen. This is the counter argument to the meta-analysis in favor of the drug that shall not be named, the misleading clinical evidence systematic reviews of ivermectin. So what I started doing was going through the actual sources for the statements they made. And the statement they used for this first source here was that it takes more ivermectin in your system than it is safe. So we talk about the overdosing or whatever. So that was a statement made, sourced by this article. So this is the actual article, and we go to ivermectin. And to bring back your stuff here is they brought up the studies that it inhibits several viruses, including HIV-1, dengue, and in vitro. And so all of the positive things. which you brought up, which aren't mentioned with the source in this article, but they're there. And so the dosage they bring up here. So this is where they pulled their statement from. So yes, you got a reduction, but it was at these doses that are just way too much for the human body to handle in vitro. So not in human studies. But then as we go on, they did bring up the studies that showed some positive effects with the drug that shall not be named. But then they wrote it off as it's probably it because other drugs that might work were in there. And we look at this one right here. The other drug that shall not be named. So here's my beef. First of all, they sourced something without using any of the positive parts of the source. So there's cherry picking right there. So they use one statement here about the dosage in vitro without acknowledging that there's a whole wealth of other things that are happening around that. But also it's the circular reasoning. HCQ doesn't work. Okay. Ivermectin doesn't work. But yet when they source their problems with ivermectin, it's because it's in conjunction with HCQ. So the question shouldn't be, well, it didn't work because we have another variable, which they use for the other drug. It should be, okay, so they don't work alone, but something is making them work together. So what's the deal? And that's where it should have gone. But they said, nope, doesn't work alone. Doesn't work
Move on,
alone.
nothing to see here.
Move on, nothing to see here. So there's the two problems with their source. So we've got a little bit of cherry picking of data, and it's kind of karma, I guess, that the name is the same. I don't know if there's any relation, but yeah, there's a lot of people from and in India. So I don't know where this paper was originally written, but it's but again, they just pulled one part of this whole section and of an actual massive analysis of all the treatments, including other drugs not to be named, and cherry pick their data from it. So it doesn't take much, and we see where the sides are. Now, I would venture to guess, and I haven't gone through all the pro ivermectin studies, but I would they did a different kind of analysis. They did a mathematical analysis across the results. So I think you'd see less of this, just because this is actually an opinion piece. If you really break this down, it's an opinion piece.
I mean, just
yeah.
You mentioned just the title of it as hold on. That's a, that's an editorial there. Just by that title, that's exactly what that is.
It's an editorial, and here's our sources, which doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that you need to actually dig into the sources before you make a final opinion. You can't make a final opinion from reading the article. Whereas a mathematical analysis, you really have to have access to the data to do your own mathematical analysis alongside it to really contend with. So it's comparing apples to oranges. It's not the same. But back to the original point, someone in the position of Sanjay Gupta should not know something that is a big deal in that argument. And
directly related to what you're talking about, directly related to what you are speaking authoritatively on. Okay, but back to our previous discussion, it really does analogize to the never stretch your shoulder. Hold on a second. If you're going to say something so definitive and speak with authority on this issue, have you looked at any contrary opinions? Because I can guarantee you that those guys should know who Eric Cressy is. All right. have you read his Sturdy Shoulder Solutions? Do you have that book?
I
Have,
do
have
not.
you?
Yeah.
No, I mean them.
Yeah.
You should have that. This is your profession. You are experts and you are speaking authoritatively. So if I get that book and I crack it open, what's it going to tell me about, shoulder stretching or shoulder mobility uh, compared to what you're saying? Because you should know.
Well, make the link between politics and sales. Eric Cressy sells a product to the baseball community.
Mhm.
Tom House and this nationalpitching.com sell a product to the pitching community that are in opposition if you're in the strength and conditioning realm. If you're talking strength and conditioning and you're saying my shoulder program for this, then you're in competition. You're in direct competition with Eric Cressy. So it's in your benefit to try to straw man him
Mhm.
or in some way counter his message. So it's the same as politics. So politics is sales. It's just selling something different.
Yeah, but and which leads right into the problem here, which is this is political when it shouldn't be. It's supposed to be about health.
Mhm.
The side pushing the official narrative is telling us it's all about the health. It's all about the science.
Mhm.
Well, then why are you acting so political? Why are you acting like salesmen?
Well, and
You
I
know?
would like to, play the whole they got what they deserve thing with Merck because they blocked so much of the ivermectin talk. But apparently they got a little dose of their own medicine because a lot of their trials for their new medicine that they're putting out now was blocked for about 6 months by the national media because Trump liked it. And we got a red blue situation again. So they ended up being blocked for about 6 months on their trials to get this product out. So yeah, they got a little dose of their own medicine, but if it really does have a 50% reduction in negative outcomes, 50% of 600,000 people is a lot.
Yeah.
And how many of those were in the last 6 months? I guess a little less than half because we're getting better treatment. But so 50%
Yeah, but
of
it's not the
200,000 is
last
still
few months
100,000
though.
people.
This is something that is infuriating and despicable, and the woke crowd who claim to be all about empathy and sympathy and caring. Okay, Trump was in office when he got COVID and he was successfully treated with monoclonal antibodies, and you didn't hear a peep about it until just a couple of months ago when DeSantis started talking about it because Florida was using it successfully. So there's this huge gap here. How many drug commercials do I see when I sit and watch football on Sunday? A lot. I haven't seen a single one about monoclonal antibodies. What?
Mhm.
Why? Where you would think that people would be making that and selling that and pushing that if it has been so successful, and now it's so successful they're rationing it.
Mhm.
What?
Yeah.
None of this makes
Well, in the
sense
name of, right? In the
medically.
name of social
Yeah.
justice.
Yeah, none of this makes sense medically. You're saying you're all about the science and caring and medicine and treatment and helping people. How many people have died since it was reported that at the time President Donald Trump was successfully treated with monoclonal antibodies, and now when you're finally acknowledging that they work? And then how many people subsequently will die because you're now rationing the thing you finally admitted works? I hate everyone and everything.
Yeah, that's the theme of all of this lately because uh, yeah, I see all of these. We've both been pouring through the research and such and such reduction. The problem is the narrative has been it's not a cure. It's not proven to be a cure. Well, that's not how cures work.
Mm-hmm.
It's about reduction. It's about
Mm-hmm.
lessening. I mean, it's kind of a two-faced argument because this drug doesn't work because it doesn't cure it. even though it has a reduction in outcomes, right? So we talk about even just the over-the-counter drugs they used in the Italy nursing home study. They worked to some degree. They didn't work 100%. And that same group that will throw a perfectly cheap, useful, reducing medication out the window are the same group arguing for masks. And this is my problem with the argument for masks is it's not about stopping. It's about reduction. And oh gosh, I should have linked it, but on the Rogan thing, it's near the end, so you might not have seen it. They brought up video of some doctor on YouTube that's putting masks on and vaping through them. And they were talking about, and this is okay. So this gets to my third failure of the interview, and then we have to call it a day. But Gupta admitted, he's like, yeah, they don't really stop a whole lot unless you have these really awesome good ones that I happen to have one in my pocket, you know? And so there was that admission as well. But the guy's vaping through these masks and just blowing smoke everywhere. And they talked about the size of the particles versus a vape particle. And yeah, it's all about reduction. But at the same time, on the other side of the argument, anybody who has a beard and has worn a mask knows how much moisture collects in that beard, and you got to take it off every once in a while, wipe it out, or else you got this soggy ass beard. Obviously, it's keeping some of the moisture in that space. Which, when you talk viruses or bacteria or any pathogen, moisture keeps it alive longer in the atmosphere, so that way it's going to be more likely to reproduce wherever it goes, because it's in that water droplet and it's not dried out. It's not dead. It's not dying on contact or changing shape like a virus would when it hits the ground. So obviously it does a little something, or we wouldn't have to keep cleaning our beard out. So it's all about reduction versus prevention. Yeah. And if we took the same approach to the medications that people are trying to bring forward and talked about reduction instead of prevention, we're going to have a whole different story. And when you look at the bureaucratic, I got some insight in how hospitals work and how doctors have to operate. Is when you talk about malpractice, they have the top-down procedure for something. So CDC says ivermectin doesn't work, you can't use it. So that's the procedure. We're just going to go with that for now, to simplify the argument. So now if I'm a doctor and I think it works to some degree, say it's even 90%, which is probably somewhere around 50 or 60%. Say it's 90%. Even let's even make up a drug. We're going to call it Super COVID Destroyer. All right, that's the drug, Super COVID Destroyer, and it works 99% of the time. If I have 100 patients, I've got one reason to be fired. If it works 99% of the time, your antibacterial, 99.9% of bacteria get killed. I get 1,000 patients. I've got one reason to be fired and blacklisted. So no one's going to do it, or very few people are going to do it. We idolize characters like House and stuff that go forward and brave new worlds of medicine. That doesn't happen in the real world, because all you need is one patient to lose everything. Unless you did it by the book, you can lose 100 patients and still have your job.
Yep.
And we'd like to attach this noble, everybody's going to do the right thing, even if it's at the cost of their job. But
history shows that is absolutely not true.
History shows with almost any action that's not true.
Everyone thinks, how could this happen? If I were there, I would have been one of the ones saying no. I would have been one of the ones hiding a Jewish family. No, you wouldn't. Yep. No, you wouldn't. History shows that you would not, because very few people actually did, because they didn't want to face the consequences of what would happen, because there were some bad consequences. There were a lot of people who ended up in those same gas chambers because they tried to say no, because they tried to hide, a Jewish family.
Yeah, and there is good conversation in the medical community, but when it comes to the action, we still see the same pattern.
Yeah.
Whatever the CDC says, we have to do. I think that's a good place to end, because it kind of pisses me off, really.
Yeah. Bring back the Federalist Party.
or bring back autonomy, really.
Yeah. that there's still plenty more to say on this. So I think we'll pick up with this again
Well,
next time.
and we kind of we need to tease it a little bit. You had brought up a friend that wants to
Mhm.
maybe debate on this, so it's going to be a scheduling thing. I think would be the hardest part of it all because I think
Yeah.
he's West Coast, isn't he?
Yeah, I'll check
And-
with him when we're done here. We'll see what we can do.
And so for those that do watch but think we do need a little bit more diversity of thought, we're actually trying. We're trying to get some people on here to where we can talk back and forth. And I think it would be almost the version of the Rogan Gupta talk that I wish would have happened.
Should have happened. Yeah.
Should have happened. And it's where us people that are trying to bring nuance to this, what has basically become public entertainment in this debate, should be going, and hopefully it happens, and hopefully it's really productive and friendly. So I trust, because I don't know the guy. I trust you wouldn't bring somebody on that wouldn't be respectful through the whole process. So I don't know, you got to look like maybe I'm.
That'll be fine.
It'll be fine. It'll be, what's the worst that could happen? So that's a tease. Anything else? We need to have the Murray discussion at some point.
Yep, we do.
Especially with the things happening with Gruden and
oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I teased that.
Nonsense.
So you know, all right.
See y'all next time.